The fighter strip sat on a flattened coral plateau cut into the edge of a small Central Pacific island. The runway was short, uneven, and always coated in pale dust that stuck to boots, tools, and aircraft surfaces. The squadron had been operating there for 3 months. By mid-1944, the pilots no longer discussed the novelty of combat. They discussed fuel, engine hours, escort timing, and who had slept. The morning patrol returned shortly after 09:30. Ground crews heard the P-47 Thunderbolts before they saw them. The engines carried across the lagoon in a steady mechanical vibration rather than a dramatic roar. One aircraft landed slightly long, rolled to the end of the strip, and taxied back slower than usual. No visible damage, no smoke, no signs of a prolonged engagement. The pilot climbed down without urgency. First Lieutenant Daniel Mercer, 24 years old, had joined the Army Air Forces in 1942 after completing civilian flight training in Kansas. His record showed no disciplinary issues, average gunnery scores, and a habit of writing very short reports. He had flown 61 combat missions. 2 friends from his training class had already been killed in Europe. His squadron commander considered him reliable but unremarkable, the type of pilot who followed orders precisely and avoided risk unless required. Mercer handed his clipboard to operations and asked only for water. The debrief officer, Captain Harold Kimura, noticed the number written on the encounter line. Enemy aircraft destroyed. 5. Kimura did not react immediately. He had seen inflated claims before, sometimes honest misidentification, sometimes multiple pilots firing at the same target. The Pacific Air War produced confusion quickly. Glare, altitude, and distance made verification difficult. Headquarters required confirmation before crediting anything above 2. He looked at Mercer. Anything unusual about the contact? Mercer shook his head once. Short pass. They didn't react in time. No elaboration. No excitement. No attempt to justify the claim. Kimura marked the report for gun camera review and dismissed him to medical check as standard procedure. The pilot complied without asking whether the kills would be credited. That absence of interest registered more strongly than the number itself. The footage review. The squadron intelligence office was a wooden structure with blackout curtains and a portable projector mounted on a crate. Present were Captain Harold Kimura, intelligence officer, previously a navigation instructor, transferred after his bomber group suffered heavy losses in 1943. He had learned that reports without evidence created administrative problems months later. Technical Sergeant Walter Reeves, armament specialist responsible for gun harmonization. Former automotive machinist from Detroit, known for strict adherence to mechanical procedure. Lieutenant Paul Haskins, assistant operations officer, responsible for compiling claims sent to higher command. Recently transferred from a training command and still uncomfortable approving combat credits. The film reel arrived from the maintenance shack in a metal canister marked with the aircraft number. Kimura dimmed the room and started the projector. The opening frames showed cloud haze and sun glare. The P-47 was descending from altitude. Then a formation appeared, Japanese fighters in tight grouping, closer than standard defensive spacing. The firing sequence lasted approximately 1.5 seconds. Muzzle flashes appeared steady. No corrections. No prolonged tracking. Then, almost at the same moment, multiple aircraft left formation, one shedding debris immediately, another rolling inverted, a third trailing fragments before separating downward. Immediate containment. By regulation, any unusual claim required controlled handling. Kimura ordered the aircraft parked away from the line and restricted access to maintenance personnel only. Not as punishment, as preservation of evidence. Pilots began hearing rumors anyway. 5 kills in one pass traveled quickly across a fighter squadron. Kimura gathered them in briefing and spoke plainly. No confirmation yet. Nobody discusses numbers outside operations. You saw nothing unless you actually saw it. The tone was not harsh, but deliberate. He had previously watched exaggerated stories reach higher command before verification, forcing retractions that damaged credibility of the entire unit. Mechanical check. Sergeant Reeves inspected the aircraft before refueling. Ammunition remaining matched a short firing burst. Barrels showed no overheating. No stoppages recorded. He removed a belt segment and counted expended rounds. About a second and a half, he confirmed. The convergence setting immediately drew his attention. The guns were aligned closer than standard fighter settings, intended normally for bomber interception at short distance. He checked his logbook and saw his own signature from earlier that morning after correcting complaints about wide shot dispersion. He frowned but said nothing yet. Mechanical explanation alone could not account for multiple independent aircraft reactions unless spacing was unusually tight. Pilot statement. Kimura later questioned Mercer alone in the operations tent. The questioning was calm and procedural, not accusatory. Describe approach angle. High sun. Slight dive. They were level. Evasive action. Late. Multiple passes. No. Mercer hesitated once when asked whether he observed secondary explosions. I saw one aircraft break immediately. Others moved after. His tone suggested uncertainty rather than embellishment. He did not defend the 5-kill number. He simply repeated what he believed he observed. Kimura noted the pilot avoided speculation. He neither expanded nor minimized events. For an intelligence officer, that neutrality carried weight, but not proof. The pressure beneath routine. By late afternoon, the report had reached group headquarters via routine message, traffic, marked verification pending. That alone created responsibility. If confirmed, the squadron would credit an ace in a single action, something command viewed carefully because it encouraged aggressive attacks against formation aircraft, often leading to losses. Haskins reviewed previous claims that had later been downgraded. He did not want to sign a document that might be corrected months later after enemy records surfaced. Reeves remained focused on measurements, aware that if the gun settings contributed unexpectedly, his maintenance decision would be scrutinized. Kimura understood the larger implication, not whether 5 aircraft were destroyed, but whether the squadron could trust its own reporting accuracy in future combat evaluations. Closing of the opening phase. The day ended without announcement. The aircraft remained isolated. The film was duplicated and sealed. Statements were filed, but not forwarded as confirmed. On paper, the event remained unresolved. Outwardly, the squadron continued routine operations, mission planning, refueling schedules, weather checks. No one spoke about victory. Underneath that routine sat a single shared awareness. A short firing burst had produced an outcome none of them could yet explain, and until explained, responsibility rested on all of them. The pilot who fired, the mechanic who aligned the guns, and the officers who would decide what the Army Air Forces officially believed happened in the sky that morning. No second firing pass appeared in the footage. The room stayed quiet for several seconds after the reel ended. Reeves spoke first. That's one burst. Haskins leaned forward. Maybe we're missing frames. Kimura rewound and replayed it at slower speed. The timing marks on the camera edge advanced normally. No gaps. 5 separate aircraft reactions occurred within less than 3 seconds of firing. No overlapping friendly fire. No visible secondary attacker. Kimura did not record conclusion. He wrote, impact timing inconsistent with standard single-target engagement. The following day, a Navy liaison aircraft landed shortly after noon, carrying signal logs and a sketchbook sealed in a waterproof envelope. The pilot shut down, handed the packet directly to operations, and departed without remaining for briefing. The material came from a radar picket destroyer positioned west of the island and from 2 coast watchers stationed on a neighboring atoll. Captain Kimura opened the envelope inside the intelligence office. The destroyer's radar track showed a compact group of aircraft approaching from the northwest at steady altitude and speed, maintaining consistent spacing throughout the plotted route. No dispersion appeared until a sudden break in formation at the exact minute corresponding to the recorded firing burst. The operator's notes described the contact as a single formation until separation into multiple fading returns. The Coast Watcher's sketches were simpler but useful. One observer drew the aircraft in a shallow V pattern tighter than normal escort spacing. The second wrote that sunlight reflected strongly off canopies, making individual aircraft difficult to distinguish even through binoculars. Neither reported defensive maneuvering before the separation. Kimura compared timestamps. Radar separation occurred within seconds of the gun camera firing interval. The data confirmed the disruption happened immediately, not gradually, and did not involve prolonged engagement. Lieutenant Haskins studied the spacing indicated by radar width. The formation appeared compressed along its depth axis, suggesting the trailing aircraft were closer than standard doctrine allowed. If one aircraft broke apart suddenly, fragments could pass through those behind it. The theory introduced indirect damage, but required physical evidence of debris contact. Maintenance crews were instructed to inspect the P-47 again for foreign material. Small dents appeared along the leading edge of the right wing, previously dismissed as coral dust abrasion. Under magnification, 2 marks contained traces of paint inconsistent with U.S. camouflage. The fragments were carefully removed and stored. Their angle of impact indicated objects traveling toward the fighter rather than away from it. Kimura requested ballistic comparison. Reeves measured entry angles and concluded the objects were not projectiles fired at the aircraft, but light debris striking at relative speed. The fragments were thin and irregular, consistent with pieces of aircraft skin rather than munitions. This implied at least one enemy aircraft had disintegrated at close range. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Mercer was asked to review a still frame enlarged from the film. He examined it slowly. For the first time, he added detail. Immediately after firing, he saw a flash larger than a fuel ignition, followed by fragments crossing his flight path. He had rolled slightly to avoid them, but did not record earlier because he believed it unrelated to the claim count. The addition changed the geometry. A breakup occurring ahead of the formation could scatter debris rearward into trailing aircraft. Kimura overlaid estimated fragment paths onto the radar spacing chart. Several projected lines intersected positions of the following aircraft at the moment they began to fall from formation. The possibility emerged that some losses were secondary structural damage rather than direct gunfire. However, the film still showed multiple impact reactions occurring nearly simultaneously, suggesting at least 2 aircraft were hit directly before debris spread. Kimura dictated a revised working note. Primary firing solution intersected lead element. Structural breakup generated debris, field affecting trailing aircraft. The statement remained provisional pending confirmation from enemy material. By evening, a message arrived from higher headquarters indicating captured equipment from a recently seized airstrip would soon be transported for examination. Among the items listed were maintenance manuals and operational notes belonging to the same Japanese air group identified by aircraft markings in the film. Kimura requested priority access once they arrived. The office quieted as generators powered down across the airfield. The investigation now depended not on additional flight tests, but on understanding the behavior of the opposing formation, why it flew so compactly, and why it did not scatter after the first aircraft failed. The evidence suggested a procedural decision rather than a momentary mistake, but the reason remained outside the squadron's knowledge. Kimura filed the day's findings and secured the fragment samples in a labeled container. The event was no longer treated as a simple gunnery anomaly. It had become a reconstruction of decisions made in another cockpit several miles away at the same second in the sky. 3 days later, a transport aircraft delivered crates captured during the seizure of a recently abandoned Japanese air facility on a neighboring island. The cargo was transferred directly to a guarded storage tent beside operations. Among spare parts and technical binders were flight logs, briefing sheets, and a small bundle of maintenance notebooks wrapped in cloth to protect them from humidity. Captain Kimura requested a translator from group headquarters. The man who arrived, Staff Sergeant Kenji Watanabe, had grown up in California and had been assigned to intelligence duty after the outbreak of the war. He approached the documents methodically, translating aloud while Kimura and Haskins recorded. The briefing sheets described fuel conservation flights conducted under strict formation discipline. One entry instructed pilots to maintain minimal spacing to reduce visual detection and radar profile during transit between islands. Another note warned against independent maneuvering unless ordered by the leader. The directive had been issued recently after several aircraft had failed to reach base due to fuel shortages caused by evasive action against distant contacts. A maintenance notebook listed complaints about radio reliability within the same unit. Pilots were instructed to rely on visual signals from the leader rather than immediate radio calls when reacting to unexpected contacts. Delay in recognition was considered preferable to breaking formation unnecessarily. Kimura compared the date of those instructions with the day of the engagement. The procedures were active at that time. Later, Watanabe translated a fragment of a pilot's written statement recovered from a dispersal hut. The writer described seeing an aircraft pass through the formation and believing it to be friendly traffic momentarily because no warning signal had been given and the sun prevented clear identification. He wrote that only after the lead aircraft failed did he attempt to turn, but his wingman did not move, waiting for the leader's command that never came. The description aligned with the observed late reactions. Meanwhile, the fragment samples taken from the P-47 were compared with paint layers on Japanese aircraft parts found in the crates. The color and thickness matched outer skin panels rather than internal components, confirming contact with structural debris rather than small fragments from ammunition impact. Lieutenant Haskins recalculated ammunition expenditure against the number of aircraft visibly reacting in the film. The direct hit estimate decreased. The available rounds during the burst could reliably damage 2 aircraft at the recorded range, possibly 3 under ideal alignment. The remaining losses required secondary causes. Kimura organized the information into sequence. Tight formation for fuel discipline, delayed recognition due to visual identification rules, limited radio use, then sudden structural breakup inside compressed spacing. The reconstruction explained the rapid collapse without prolonged maneuvering. That evening he questioned Lieutenant Mercer again, this time focusing on distance. Mercer estimated he passed within very close proximity to the formation, closer than standard attack distance, because he initially believed they had seen him and would scatter. He chose a short burst to avoid overshooting and collision. His description of fragments crossing the canopy matched the recovered paint traces. No accusation was made. The discussion remained factual. The proximity explained both the dense impact and exposure to debris. Kimura prepared an interim report stating that not all aircraft losses could be attributed to direct gunfire and that the engagement outcome depended heavily on opposing formation procedure. He marked the claim as technically valid pending final classification review, not as a demonstration of exceptional gunnery. Before forwarding it, he reviewed the squadron briefing board. Pilots were still flying patrols daily, and similar encounters could occur again. He added a temporary instruction: maintain separation after firing passes to avoid debris collision risk. The investigation had shifted from determining whether the event occurred to understanding how easily the same conditions could end differently for the attacking aircraft. The documentation now aimed less at awarding credit and more at preventing repetition under mistaken assumptions. Group headquarters requested a formal review board before confirming the victory credits. The message specified attendance by the squadron commander, the intelligence officer, the armament chief, and the pilot involved. The purpose was not ceremonial recognition, but classification accuracy. Claims above standard thresholds affected training directives and operational analysis across the theater. The board convened inside a reinforced operations hut normally used for navigation planning. A recorder typed continuously while the projector displayed enlarged film frames on a white canvas sheet. No one spoke during the first screening. Afterward, a major from headquarters began questioning in measured order. He asked Sergeant Reeves to describe the harmonization decision. Reeves explained the guns had been aligned earlier that morning after dispersion complained from another pilot scheduled for patrol. Time pressure prevented a full briefing change before takeoff. The setting itself was approved doctrine for bomber interception, but uncommon for fighter sweeps. Reeves acknowledged he had assumed standard engagement distances would make little difference. The major did not accuse him, but asked a precise question. Would the pilot reasonably expect concentrated fire at that distance without notification? Reeves answered no. Lieutenant Mercer was then asked whether his firing decision depended on known gun alignment. He stated he aimed based on closing speed and silhouette size, not convergence calculation, because there was no time for adjustment once the approach angle was set. He emphasized he fired short bursts to avoid collision risk after realizing the formation was not maneuvering. The board compared his statement to the film timing and found the description consistent. Captain Kimura presented the translated enemy documents and the fragment analysis. He explained that at least part of the damage resulted from structural breakup within compressed spacing and delayed reaction procedures. The major questioned whether any aircraft might have been destroyed by secondary explosions rather than gunfire or debris impact. Kimura answered that fuel ignition appeared in only one frame. The remaining aircraft showed progressive structural failure without explosion signatures. Attention then turned to responsibility for the initial 5 aircraft figure entered in the report. Mercer stated he recorded what he observed leaving formation and falling, not what he personally struck. He had assumed standard confirmation procedures would determine the exact count. The board paused to review the ammunition calculations again. The number of rounds fired could not reliably account for 5 independent direct destructions. However, radar separation, timing, and debris evidence supported the loss of multiple aircraft in the same instant. The major summarized, the claim represented a combat result rather than individual shooting performance. The difference required careful wording in official records. A final point emerged when reviewing pre-flight procedures. The harmonization change had been entered into maintenance logs, but not into the pilot briefing board. The squadron commander accepted responsibility for not verifying configuration updates before launch. The omission did not cause the engagement, but influenced its outcome. No disciplinary tone followed. Instead, the board rewrote the engagement description line by line, replacing the original wording "destroyed by gunfire" with "lost during firing pass and immediate structural breakup within formation." The number remained unchanged, but attribution shifted from direct action to combined circumstances. The session ended without commendation or criticism. The revised report would be forwarded to headquarters as an operational analysis example rather than a hero citation. Mercer returned to flight duty schedule the same afternoon. Before leaving, the major instructed the squadron to incorporate configuration verification into pre-flight briefings for every sortie. The instruction was practical and immediate, intended to prevent pilots from entering combat with unknown weapon characteristics. The investigation now awaited only final classification approval. The event had been reconstructed as accurately as available evidence allowed, and responsibility had been distributed across procedure, conditions, and chance rather than concentrated on a single individual. The final response from theater headquarters arrived by encoded message late in the evening. The classification was approved exactly as submitted. 5 aircraft lost during a single firing pass, attributed to direct hits and immediate structural breakup within compressed formation spacing. The wording was administrative and precise. No recommendation for publicity followed. The report was assigned to operational analysis archives rather than victory summaries. The squadron commander read the message once to the assembled officers and posted a short notice on the briefing board. The language avoided numbers and names. It stated only that the engagement had been verified and that revised procedures were now permanent. From the next morning onward, every pilot attended a detailed pre-flight review covering weapon convergence settings, expected engagement distance, and separation after firing. Mechanics read their configuration entries aloud before each launch. The additional steps added several minutes to preparation, but no one objected. The investigation had demonstrated how a minor unspoken adjustment could shape combat results without the pilot's knowledge. Lieutenant Mercer continued flying scheduled patrols. During later engagements, he fired longer bursts at greater distance, and broke away earlier. Wingman noticed he avoided closing tightly even when targets appeared slow to react. After one mission, he explained simply that debris moves faster than expected at closing speed and cannot be predicted once an aircraft fails in close formation. No further explanation was required. Captain Kimura completed the final file by attaching fragment samples, translated documents, radar plots, and the amended combat description. He added a concluding technical remark. The engagement showed how opposing procedural decisions could interact in ways neither side intended. The note was not philosophical. It was written to guide future analysis. The file was sealed and transferred to group records for distribution to training commands. The squadron received no ceremony. Flight operations continued with the same schedule, the same maintenance cycles, and the same patrol routes over open water. Weeks later, replacement pilots arrived and were briefed using the case as instruction rather than example of marksmanship. The emphasis remained on identification, spacing, and verification of aircraft configuration before takeoff. The event became a reference point discussed without names, framed as a situation where survival depended on understanding conditions rather than exploiting them. No further action was required. The engagement was fully accounted for, responsibility assigned through procedure changes, and the aircraft returned to ordinary service life. The record closed without celebration, but with a clear adjustment to practice that reduced uncertainty for those who would fly the same patrols afterward.